Imagine for a moment that you are the royal physician. The year is 1833, and the formidable King Ferdinand VII of Spain has just drawn his last breath. But as the court dissolves into hushed grief and political maneuvering, your duty is far from over. The Queen Regent, Maria Cristina, summons you not for a final prayer or a standard autopsy, but for a task so bizarre, so profoundly strange, it feels torn from the pages of a Gothic nightmare. She wants you to preserve a monstrous secret, a legend that has been whispered in the darkest corners of the palace for decades. This is the unbelievable story of how a rumored curse, a grotesque physical abnormality, brought a powerful king and his string of unfortunate wives to their knees. To truly comprehend the waking nightmare of Ferdinand VII's life, you first have to understand the poison that coursed through his very blood. He was a Bourbon, a powerful dynasty in its own right, but his veins also carried the heavy, centuries-old heritage of the Habsburgs. This was a dynasty infamous for one thing above all else: relentless inbreeding. For generations, in a desperate bid to consolidate power and keep their bloodline pure, Europe's great royal families had married their own relatives. Uncles were wed to nieces, and first cousins to first cousins. They didn't know it at the time, of course, but with each of these strategic unions, they were methodically laying a genetic minefield destined to detonate in spectacular fashion. This practice led to a dynasty plagued with debilitating health problems, from recurrent epilepsy and bouts of insanity to cripplingly high rates of infant mortality and early death. The most famous and visible symbol of this genetic decay was the Habsburg jaw, a severe facial deformity marked by a jutting lower jaw and a misshapen face that made it difficult to eat or speak. But according to the salacious palace legends that swirled around Ferdinand, the curse that fell upon him was far more intimate and, supposedly, far more destructive. Whispers from the court and politically motivated pamphlets designed to ridicule the monarch painted a shocking and grotesque picture. These accounts, which modern historians consider far more legend than verifiable fact, describe a man afflicted with macrogenitosomia, grotesque and unmanageable enlargement of his reproductive organ. One French writer, in a particularly cruel and vivid description that has fueled the myth for centuries, claimed it was oddly shaped and impossibly large. Dark, secret chronicles were said to have recorded post-mortem measurements, with the most persistent tales claiming a length of over 14 inches. In an age that prized modest proportions and piety, this supposed deformity wasn't seen as a mark of virility, but as something unnatural and monstrous. It was, according to the legend, a physical torment that would cause unimaginable suffering for the king himself, and for every woman who was forced to share his royal bed. Ferdinand's reign can be told as a story of 4 royal marriages, each one a distinct and tragic chapter in this tale of dynastic suffering. The legend, which grew more elaborate with each passing year, insists that his anatomical abnormality made normal marital relations physically impossible, transforming the royal bedchamber from a place of intimacy into a veritable chamber of horrors. His first wife was his own cousin, Maria Antonia of Naples. One story, likely an embellishment designed to scandalize the court, claims their first night together was a diplomatic disaster that left the young bride horrified. The marriage was plagued by profound difficulty and ended in deep tragedy. Maria Antonia suffered 2 heartbreaking miscarriages and ultimately died at the tender age of 21, with the official cause listed as tuberculosis. But in the feverish, rumor-filled atmosphere of the court, insidious gossip swirled that her death was no accident of illness, but a direct result of the king's monstrous curse. His second wife was his own niece, Maria Isabel of Braganza. By now the court was desperate for an heir, and according to the lore, her life was transformed into a series of humiliating clinical experiments. It's rumored that, Royal physicians designed bizarre marital aids, including a custom-made donut-shaped cushion, just to make conception physically possible. This marriage, too, ended in a scene of almost unbelievable horror. After giving birth to a daughter who died in infancy, Maria Isabel became pregnant again. During a long and difficult labor, the baby, positioned incorrectly, was stillborn. When Maria Isabel fainted from the ordeal, the physicians tragically and incompetently presumed she was also dead. They ordered a caesarean section to remove the fetus. As the surgeon's scalpel made the first incision, she reportedly let out a blood-curdling scream of agony before bleeding to death. She was only 21 years old. His third wife, Maria Josepha of Saxony, was just 16 years old when she was married to the king. Devout, pious, and profoundly naive, she was said to be utterly horrified by the king and the duties expected of her. Their union was short, miserable, and produced no children. The young queen died just a few years into the marriage, further cementing the king's reputation for being cursed. The legend of Ferdinand had now claimed 3 wives, the court was in a state of quiet panic, and the king was still without a male heir. His deeply personal, physical struggles were escalating into a full-blown crisis for the future of the Spanish monarchy. The stunning cruelty that came to define Ferdinand VII's rule is difficult to separate from the persistent stories of his physical suffering and private humiliation. His subjects, who had once celebrated his ascension to the throne by nicknaming him *El Deseado*, or the Desired One, came to despise him, branding him with a new title, *El Rey Felon*, the Felon King. When he returned to power in 1813 after being imprisoned by Napoleon, the Spanish people, weary of foreign rule, hoped for a liberal hero who would uphold the progressive Constitution of 1812. Instead, they got an absolute tyrant. Ferdinand immediately tore up the liberal constitution, declaring its authors traitors. He brutally restored the absolute monarchy and launched a vicious campaign against any and all of his opponents. He even reinstated the feared Spanish Inquisition, and his network of spies was everywhere, breeding an atmosphere of terror. Historians note that he seemed to take a grim, personal pleasure in the suffering of his enemies, a cold-hearted cruelty that many have linked to his own secret, internal torment. His paranoia was the stuff of legend. He trusted no one, was convinced of plots against him at every turn, and his court was a hotbed of suspicion and fear. This suffocating atmosphere of terror completely crippled his government and his army, contributing directly to the catastrophic loss of most of Spain's colonies in the Americas. The king, so intensely focused on his internal battles, both physical and psychological, was losing an entire empire. The legend of his monstrous body thus became a potent and fitting symbol for his monstrous reign, dysfunctional, grotesque, and inflicting pain on all it touched. Ferdinand's fourth and final marriage to another one of his nieces, Maria Cristina of the Two Sicilies, finally produced a living heir. But it was a daughter, Isabella. According to Spain's Salic law, which had been introduced by the Bourbons, a woman could not inherit the throne. In one of his final, momentous acts, Ferdinand defied generations of tradition. He issued the Pragmatic Sanction of 1830, changing the law of succession to name Isabella his heir, deliberately bypassing his ambitious and ultra-conservative brother, Don Carlos. This single act plunged Spain headfirst into the Carlist Wars, a series of bloody and devastating civil wars that would define the nation for decades to come. When Ferdinand VII finally died in 1833, he left behind a nation fractured and in turmoil, and a bizarre legend that has persisted for over 2 centuries. The stories are incredibly detailed and salacious. The special cushion, the terrified young wives, and even the supposed post-mortem preservation of the organ itself, which was rumored to be locked away in a jar of formaldehyde deep in the Vatican archives. But this is where the story takes its most crucial and final turn. Because for all the lurid, shocking details, modern historians find no credible medical or historical evidence to support the fantastic claims about Ferdinand VII's anatomy. There are no reliable autopsy reports describing his alleged condition. The tragic deaths of his wives are well documented, but are medically attributed to known illnesses like tuberculosis or to horrific, almost unimaginable, medical malpractice during childbirth, not to any form of sexual trauma. The most lurid descriptions come almost exclusively from anonymous pamphlets and the writings of his political enemies, propaganda that has been sensationalized and embellished over time. The story of a body part preserved in the Vatican is considered pure urban legend, a myth with no factual basis. The truth is likely far more mundane, but just as tragic in its own right. Ferdinand was the product of intense royal inbreeding, a practice scientifically known to cause a host of genetic disorders and, critically, reduced fertility in men. The very real, documented difficulty in producing an heir was likely a consequence of this shared and damaged family tree, not a single, spectacular deformity. The legend of the 14-inch king is a powerful one because it provides a simple, shocking explanation for a much more complex reality. It was far easier to blame a monstrous body for the king's cruelty and his disastrous reign than to confront the complicated and uncomfortable truths of political failure, dynastic decay, and the devastating biological consequences of keeping power all in the family. The story of Ferdinand VII is a chilling and unforgettable reminder that sometimes the most monstrous and enduring legends are born from very human and very real tragedies. What do you think is the darkest secret in all of royal history? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for more stories that history tried desperately to forget, make sure to subscribe. In the end, Ferdinand VII is remembered as one of Spain's absolute worst monarchs. His legacy isn't one of glorious battles or enlightened rule, but of deep-seated paranoia, unimaginable cruelty, and brutal civil war. The legend of his body, whether it was based on a kernel of truth or was pure fiction, became the perfect, if grotesque, metaphor for his entire reign. A story of profound dysfunction that left a nation deeply and permanently scarred. While the lurid tales of his anatomy may be little more than historical gossip, they speak to a deeper, more resonant truth about a king who was incapable of ruling his kingdom, and perhaps was tragically incapable of even ruling his own body.